the Fine Five and the Ugly Five. 5 best, 5 worst teams in the NFL. Now, 1 week sample size, do you have a lot of changes?
I have 2 changes.
On the Fine or the Uglies, or both?
One on the Fine and one on the Ugly.
All right, let's go to the Ugly Five first. 5 worst teams in the NFL. Number 5. Who do you got?
I actually slid the Browns into the mix at number 5. They just looked like the typical Browns. And I know when you go through their roster, you can see that there's a ton of talent there. But that sure reminded me of the typical Browns, no?
They did not look good. There's no question. There's no question at all. I have number 5. I had Detroit last week. I stay with Detroit again. They didn't look awful, but they just fell apart. They absolutely – and they were at home, too. I know there's nobody there, but you're at home. You have a big lead against a team that doesn't have a lot of expectations. You let Mitch Trubisky come back in that game. Now, I had them at 5 last week. I keep them at 5 this week. Detroit's number 5 in my Ugly 5. Number 4, last week I had the Giants. I'm going to stick with the Giants again. I didn't think they looked that ugly. They weren't that bad, but Jason Garrett, just pedestrian as a coordinator. Their offense, you know, for Barkley to only have 6 yards, Garrett's got to do a better job of figuring out ways to get him the ball creatively. Their defense just is a disaster. Giants number 4 in my Ugly 5.
I actually had the Giants in there last week. That was the team that bounced out of the Ugly 5 to put the Browns in. My number 4, the New York Jets. I don't know what's going on there. Has Sam Darnold really taken that leap? You hear this wonky news about Le'Veon Bell. He's going on the injured, the IR, and then he's saying nothing's wrong with him. It's just been really weird with him. I don't like the direction the Jets are going in at all with this head coach and quarterback tandem.
Don't know why you would. I've got Cleveland number 3. The Cleveland Browns were the typical Cleveland Browns. 38 points, defense a disaster, but 6 points from the offense. Odell Beckham, Landry. You had the number 1 pick in that. Look, I think they messed that number 1 pick in the draft. He had a good rookie year, but a lot of people criticized that pick when they made it, and I think it's coming back to bite them a little bit that Mayfield's not very good. And I think their biggest problem is that Mayfield is just a guy. You want to talk about just a guy? They had a lot of options in that draft, and I don't know that any one of those options were just going to be, change the franchise of the Cleveland Browns options around. But Baker Mayfield, they made that pick, and people kind of questioned that pick. They could have had Sam Darnold. I'm not saying he's great. Josh Allen, not saying he's great. Josh Rosen, certainly not great. There was all those quarterbacks in that draft. None of them have really worked out. I guess Allen's been the best of that crew. Lamar Jackson, they could have taken him.
Right. No, I agree with you. I'm not a huge Baker guy. It doesn't seem to be working out as planned. My number 3 is the Jaguars, and I just don't think that – look, they won. They beat the Colts. I still don't believe in them as an overall football team. The reason I don't put them 1, though, I feel – I don't know why. I don't know how. I just – there's no logic behind it, but I feel this Gardner Minshew thing, they might win a couple more games than some of the teams below them on this list for me. I don't think that they're very good at all, but I feel like they're going to find a way to maybe win a couple. I still think they stink, though, and for that reason, they're my number 3.
Yeah, I had them as the worst team last week, but they won, and that was impressive enough. I gave them a week to get out of this because I feel like they're going to be in it all year long. So number 2 for me, you're going to see these teams play on Thursday night. It's the Bengals. Yeah, you might say, well, they actually hung in there. They played pretty well. They were at home. They still got a lot of problems. I mean, their offense, Burrows looks like he was competent. I like what he brings. And I think they're going to be more fun than they were last year, obviously, because they were just a complete dumpster fire last year. But, Burrows, I thought, had a pretty, up and down game. He threw an interception under 200 yards, nothing special there. They didn't get blown out, but they played the Chargers, who last week the Chargers were in my Ugly 5. I took them out this week, but 16-13. If you're struggling against the Chargers, that kind of tells me that maybe the Cleveland Browns the Cincinnati Bengals are going to have a long year ahead. A.J. Green, by the way, welcome back. 5 catches, 51 yards.
He's definitely going to be a help for Joe Burrow, without a doubt. My number 2 it's still Washington. And I realize that their defensive front was definitely electric, but I don't think that they're going to be going up against Nate Herbigs every single week. And I just feel like it was a product more so of the Eagles collapsing and having a ton of injuries more so than, what they're able to provide. And that's not to knock their defensive front, but their offense, I don't see them scoring a lot of points. I just can't imagine Dwayne Haskins and that blah offense really being enough to win a ton of football games. So for the ugly 5, I'm still sticking with Washington, even though they had a great comeback win against the Eagles. I'm not sold on them long term.
Yeah, I mean, I had Washington in my ugly 5 last week. They were number 3, but their defensive front, I mentioned this to John Clayton. I don't think it's this year, but that front 4, he talked about the problem with having a front 4 is you can't pay them all, but you can pay them this year and next year. Next year, that team might be, if they can somehow get a weapon on that offense, if they can get one weapon on that offense, I don't have them in my ugly 5 this week. My number 1 ugly 5 team, it's the Jets. You might say, why the Jets? Just complete incompetence again. I mean, Darnold, I'm not saying he's a bust. I don't like Gase at all. The defense is a disaster. You give up 300 yards to Josh Allen, who's not a very, accurate passer. Right now, I think the Jets are maybe the worst run organization in football. So for that, them, Cleveland, you got some bad run organizations. Washington. The Jets, though, just can't get out of their own way. That game just, I don't know. They stink. They stink. They put this whole story with Le'Veon Bell. They put him on the injured list, and he tweets out, my hamstrings are fine. I mean, you can't make up some of the stuff that happens with that team up there. So for all the drama around that team, even Clayton mentioned Darnold getting mono. He mentioned Wentz, but then he corrected himself and said, no, that was actually Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold got mono last year. You mentioned he gets mono during COVID? That would be pretty nasty.
That would not be a good look whatsoever.
Jets are number one.
My number 1 is the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm just not believing in them. There's just a lot of holes that they need to figure out. And with the quarterback, you got a rookie quarterback in there. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs, a lot of learning curves. Although I realized that they have a ton of holes, but it wasn't as if they just got dominated and absolutely destroyed and they didn't have a chance. They had a fighter's chance in that game, but I still don't think that they have enough overall to really compete this season whatsoever.
All right, let's go to the fine 5. That's our ugly 5. 5 worst. Who are the 5 best teams? Who do you got, number 5?
This is where I made my change. The 49ers out, Green Bay Packers in. Very, very surprised with how dominant they looked against a Minnesota team that a lot had favored to win the division. Now, of course, it's only one football game, but the way that Aaron Rodgers came out firing, throwing touchdowns left and right, Devontae Adams, it was electric to watch. I had to slide them into my 5.
Last week I had 49ers. I bumped them out. I went with Pittsburgh, number 5. I thought getting Roethlisberger back, I said this before the season, they won 8 games without him. I think he's worth at least 2. That gets him to 10. He might even be worth more than that. I would just going on the low end, and I think you saw why. He spreads the ball around so proficiently, man. He gets everybody involved there. Guys you never heard of are catching the ball, making plays. Washington, Johnson. I mean, and their defense is pretty good. So Pittsburgh, for me, is number 5 in the fine 5. Who do you got number 4?
Seattle. I love Russell Wilson. He might be my favorite quarterback to watch run around, make plays. It's so much fun to see him. He has that it factor. Not that other guys don't. Of course, Pat Mahomes and those guys do, but there's something about Russell Wilson that's so attractive to the eye when he plays the game of football. And I like what Pete Carroll brings to the table, and I love their defense. They found a way to build it once again. I got to go with Seattle at number 4.
Number 4 for me, New Orleans. I think their problem, Michael Thomas being out for a couple of weeks. We'll see how that affects the offense. Their number 2 wide receiver gets targeted less than any wide receiver in the league. So who steps up there? I think their defense is a step below some of these other teams here. Love Breeze, love Kamara, love Thomas when he's out there. Still like the Saints, but losing Thomas for the next couple of weeks, and I don't think their defense is as good as the teams in front of them here.
Losing Thomas is huge, and I think that might implement next week's version of this, depending on how they do. But the way that Tampa Bay was so heavily amped up heading into this one, it might be able to win the division. And New Orleans said, hold on a second. No. The Saints went out there and just cruised. Their defense picking off Tom Brady a couple times. Drew Brees being able to execute. I like what the Saints have. I just wonder how big of a difference that Michael Thomas injury is going to affect the team. And obviously it's going to, but I need to see how it looks next week. And until then, I'm going to keep them at 3 because I really liked what they had last week against Tampa Bay.
Seattle, for me, is number 3. See what I did there? Seattle, for me, is number 3. I love Russell Wilson. Anybody who's listened to this show over the years, I was tooting Wilson's horn probably 5 years ago as a top 5 quarterback in the league, and now I think he's maybe number 2 in the league, maybe even number 1 at times. Love him. You heard what John Clayton said about Jamal Adams. You talked about the difference between them and the Saints' defense. Jamal Adams gives them a legit defensive presence on that side of the ball. They've got great weapons on the offense. It's not great weapons, but they have a lot. DK Metcalf, by the way, he's a beast, right? They've got, Carson in the run game, who, he's nothing flashy, but he gives them something they haven't had, that lead back kind of. And they have an offensive line that's halfway decent for the first time in a while. Their line has been a dumpster fire up there. But I like Seattle, number 3. Give me Russell Wilson. Give me more Russell Wilson, baby.
That Seattle team is so much fun, and they're scary. They can do some damage if they come into any town, especially on the East Coast in a playoff game. You better be worried.
That's another great point, though, is that they travel across the country and win.
Always. It seems like they do it no-brainer. It's almost an automatic lock when they do that, when most of the time that goes against your team. Number 2, Baltimore. I like this Baltimore team. Lamar Jackson, you mentioned it when we were talking about the Ravens before. It looked like he did add a little bit more to his game. He looks calm. It looks like he's definitely added a bit, and he needed to. That was one big knock he needed to add, and there's going to be a lot of film on him from last year, and these coaches around the league are really going to heavily dissect what he was able to do last season. How is he going to adjust as a player? How is he going to work on his game as a player? You saw a little bit of it in that first game when they took down Cleveland. They still look smooth, and it looks like that team might go for a ride.
I got them number 2 as well. Love the quarterback, love the defense, love the leadership there. I love the fact that they got continuity. They got the weapons. They got, the MVP of the league in Lamar Jackson, and I think he's only better. We heard John Clayton say it. I said they were 14-2. Are they better? He said, yep, without hesitation. He came back as a better, more polished passer this year. I mean, so efficient the other day, 3 touchdowns, and they just have a second year as a group together. That Baltimore team is going to be fun, and they are going to be tough to beat.
So are the Chiefs, and that's why they're my number 1. They're just rolling. It looked like they didn't even skip a beat. They look just as dominant. Their offense flowed so beautifully. Will they lose a game? Will we see 16-0? Will we see 19-0? Probably not. But still, they look phenomenal. And Andy Reid, will he come out with the face mask? That's the real question. Not will the Chiefs win. Will he come out with the face mask? That's the big bet of the weekend for the Chiefs.
Yeah, I had betting odds on that yesterday. I forgot what I did with them, but it was pretty funny. I got the Chiefs, too. And we asked John Clayton, are they better than last year's team? He said they are, too. So, tough to kind of Brian Baldinger, who's calling their game on Sunday for Compass Media, he was on and said they're better than last year. So 2 pretty respected voices that both think the Chiefs are better than the team that won the Super Bowl. Hey, what will happen to the Andy Reid haters if Andy Reid wins back-to-back Super Bowls?
I'll tell you what, they'd say it's all Pat Mahomes.
They probably will, but didn't he draft Pat Mahomes?
Valid.
Valid.